With a little under 2 weeks to go until the trade deadline, Colby and I will tell you what we would do if we ran the show in Seattle. Plus, we'll give you our thoughts on the Mariners draft as a whole coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Potom for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So during the offseason, of course, we give you our offseason plans for the Mariners. Today, we're going to give you our trade deadline plans for the Mariners. Colby and I have each come up with a trade deadline plan of our own. Before we get into that, though, we're going to talk about the Mariners' entire draft class now that it's complete. First, shout out to our title sponsor today, PrizePicks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's all lowercase for first deposit match up to $100. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial. So the 2024 MLB Draft is in the books. The Mariners made 20 selections over the course of the last 3 days. We talked about the first 8 of them on Monday's show. Now we're going to dive into the rest of the class now that we have the full picture. And their day 3 strategy, a lot of right-handed pitchers, Colby. They took a couple of position players, but overall it was right-handed pitching heavy. So out of those guys, who stood out to you?
The two things that stand out, a lot of right-handed pitching, obviously, but also 19 of their 20 selections, college guys, only one prep guy. It was a good one, a really good one that they're going to have to go significantly over slot at. We learned today that Sloan was one of the guys they were considering taking at 15. So obviously they really like this. They feel like they had got 2 first-round picks, essentially. Sloan's going to get $3 million. Senja is going to get a slot, which is about $4.8 million. So those two contracts or those two deals have already been reported. They're not official until they pass a physical, but those numbers are in. And because they're giving Sloan $3 million, they had to save some money somewhere in the top 10. And they did that and then some. And that's why they could take a guy like Aiden Butler, who's probably going to require slot. He could enter the draft again next year if he has a good year at Florida State and get a good chunk of change. So Butler is probably going to be over slot, so that makes him interesting. D'Onofrio, the outfielder from North Carolina, just a really tooled up guy, plus speed, can play all 3 outfield positions very well. There's some pop in the bat. So that's an interesting name. Christian Little, the pitcher from LSU.
Yeah.
He's been on the draft radar for like 5 years. Since, he decided to go to LSU. So he was a really interesting prospect as a prep, and then he just never really found it at LSU. There's pretty good stuff there, but there's not consistency with both stuff and control and command. So he is just, a blank, basically a blank canvas, and the Mariners are going to try and rework him entirely into something that can get to the big league. So Little, because of his history as a draft prospect, certainly interesting. And the Mariners feel like a good team to take a shot on a guy like that. One of the guys that really stands out to me in the back half of this is Wyatt Lunsford Shankman from East Carolina. He is known as the law firm.
Shout out to Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting guy. Definitely somebody we're going to talk to Joe about whenever we get him on. It is been described as a bowling ball sinker and a wipeout slider. So lots to like there. Probably reliever profile, but maybe not. Pretty good size. Can possibly handle a starter's workload. We'll see what they want to do with him. But he was considered by a lot of people to be a day 2 pick. And he fell to pretty much the end of day 3. So he might be a guy that the Mariners spend a little bit of extra money on to get signed here as well. And then just one other thing of note here, Ryan Piccolo, the 20th round pick, their last pick from St. Joseph. He's the son of the Royals GM. And if you remember, the Royals drafted Jerry Dipoto's son like three years ago, Jonah. So, I mean, is there a little,
Sure.
A little something there to that, or do they think that Piccolo is like a legitimate prospect? Or what's going on there. But it is funny to note that, they take the GM's son, they take the Royals GM son a couple years after the Royals take the Mariners GM son in the last round of the draft. That's
now, to be fair, the Royals GM at the time when they took Jonah Dipoto was not this guy.
No,
but Dayton Moore. But yeah,
right. Still a funny little connection there. Jonah, by the way, now pitches for the Phillies. He was traded. So, it's interesting because one thing we know, Jerry told his guys, we're not drafting my son. Like, we're not going to, he's going to make his own path, right, into the professional ranks. So don't do me this favor or anything like that. I wonder if, I wonder if there was a similar discussion here with Piccolo and his dad of you got to make it on your own type of thing. But I just thought that was funny. Brandon, I think it's Ike. I think so. VCU, Tyler Locklear's teammate. And he's a third baseman, could also play some outfield. He's got some power, some interesting hit tool there. But yeah, this is a draft for the pitchers, for the arms. And day 3, I feel like Christian Little and Lunsford Shankman are probably your best bets to be the Logan Evans, Brandon Garcia type of day 3 guys that the Mariners have had pretty good luck finding and developing and getting value out of these day 3 guys. That they've traded a couple of them after about a year for legitimate players. So day 3 is not quite a throwaway. Most of these guys will be nothing. But the Mariners do seem to have really good luck on these day 3 arms in particular. And they've really turned it a couple of major leaguers out of day 3, a couple of, top 15-ish prospects out of day 3. So you definitely have to keep an eye on these guys. But to me, if they're going to do it with any of these guys, Little, Ike, and probably Lunsford Shankman would be at the top of my list.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there have been quite a few notable day 3 selections or just selections within rounds 11 through 20 since Scott Hunter joined the front office as the Mariners director of amateur scouting. JP Sears, who's now part of the A's rotation. He was traded in the Nick Rumbelow deal. Cade Marlowe, of course. Carter Benz, who they traded for Tyler Anderson. Andrew Moore, who was part of the Luis Castillo deal. William Fleming, who was part of the Carlos Santana deal. Darren Bowen, who was, of course, included in the Jorge Polanco deal. Troy Taylor, who's shown some nice things down in Double-A. Darren McCacken, Brandon Garcia, Logan Evans. There's quite a few day 3 or rounds 11 through 20 guys that they've been able to identify that have been interesting, at the very least have developed into somewhat of an asset to use and trade. So yeah.
Player development, you have to draft and develop. Don't forget the development, and the Mariners are very good at both. So you have to keep an eye on all these guys, but there are some that, and by the way, Harrison Krelling, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Apparently he was a favorite of the area scouts across the league who sat in his region. There is just a lot of upside there and a lot of really good metrics that make him an interesting arm. So the Mariners definitely took some traits. Probably going to talk to Joe about this whenever we have him on, but I imagine he's gonna like the Lunsford Shankman pick the most. That would be my guess.
Yeah, so we're gonna have Joe on the show on Friday, actually. So tomorrow we might actually do a Fan Fiction Friday on Thursday. Colby and I will talk about that, and then if we were going to do that, we'll send out the tweet tonight for you guys to submit your trades. Now it's our turn, though, to give you our trade ideas. Colby and I have crafted an individual trade deadline plan for the Mariners, and we're going to go over both of those in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Booking.com and Game Time.
With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, I'm talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Even a Mariners fan can have a great time down in Houston, whether you're watching Cal Raleigh hit one into the Crawford boxes or chowing down on some authentic Texas barbecue. Maybe you're doing both at the same time. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or the Booking.com app. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, and I get to see the view of every seat in the house, so I know exactly what I'm buying. Game Time's last-minute deals give you up to 60% in savings buying last minute for sports, music, comedy, and more. And to avoid any surprises at checkout, you can turn on their all-in pricing to see the full cost, fees included. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Mariners will kick off the second half of the season on Friday against the Astros. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. All right, it is time to get into our individual trade deadline plans for your Seattle Mariners. So Colby and I have two targets that we both have our eyes set on. We'll get into those deals in a second. We also have one unique deal apiece, so we're going to get into those first. We'll start with Colby's. So Colby kicks things off here by targeting Tigers infielder Andy Ibanez and has the Mariners trading them Jonathan Clase, just straight up a 1-for-1 Clase for Ibanez. So Colby, walk us through this deal.
Ibanez, interesting guy. He's had his moments in the past. You get him for 4 years, 4 full years after this year. But I believe he'll be Super 2, so he will be ARB eligible. So it's not a rental per se, but it's also not a super high impact bat. But Ibanez does do a couple things well. He's a really good defender, particularly at second base, but he could also play third base and shortstop. So there is really, he could play all 4 infield positions. So he's help off the bench, but the main reason I'm targeting him this year, he's hitting 390, 424, 623 against left-handed pitching. That is a 192 WRC plus. My plan, could I go get a full-time second baseman? Probably could have found somebody, but I didn't find anything that fit with the rest of the plan. And so I look at Ibanez as a third bat, as a platoon guy who could play second or third, maybe, against left-handed pitching. And then also occasionally play against right-handed pitching. It also frees up Dylan Moore to play the outfield if need be. So I think the Ibanez addition is, let's get a little bit more defense in our infield and on our bench. Let's get somebody who crushes left-handed pitching, who, very realistically could hit fifth against lefties in the right lineup, but also can play short if we need him to, can play third, mostly if we need him to, can play second, and is not making really any money this year. So it's a cheap bench upgrade who's going to start about 35% of the games for the rest of the year. But I think when you take a look at the combination of players that I'm adding to this lineup, Ibanez will make sense when you look at the big picture of things. And yeah, Clase, trading 6 years of Clase. I know a lot of people like him. You guys know that I'm not really a huge fan of him, but you're trading 6 years of Clase for 4.5 of Ibanez if you want to keep him for 4.5 years. Basically, you're trading a fourth outfielder for a utility infielder. And that's, assuming Clase ever becomes a fourth outfielder in actuality. So, that's just the idea. I'm going to trade from an area where, Clase is really not going to help me that much. I'd rather have the bat off the bench than the speed off the bench. And I like Ibanez as a defender more, as a more versatile and just better defender coming off my bench than I do somebody like Clase. So, thinks trading a 22-year-old for a 31-year-old, maybe, but that's the way it goes.
So my idea here is Brandon Lowe. I have the Mariners getting Brandon Lowe from the Tampa Bay Rays. Try once again to address second base in a meaningful way. And I have the Mariners giving up Ty Pete Jeter Martinez and Will Skomberg, who's this 23-year-old they recently signed, and they've actually helped him figure some things out. He's technically the strikeout leader for the Mariners amongst all Mariners pitchers down in the minor leagues this year. So yes, Lowe has so many injury concerns. We've talked about him in the past, but he hasn't played more than 100 games just once over the last 3 years, just 109 games in 2023. The most games he's played is 149 in 2021. He hasn't even really gotten close to that in any other year of his career. And yes, the Rays probably want to get out from under this money as well. But we're talking about a guy that's currently running a 134 WRC plus in this market at a position where there are going to be very few options. We're talking about it's probably Luis Rengifo, maybe Nico Horner, maybe Jazz Chisholm, and that's probably it in terms of like everyday second baseman you could feasibly acquire at the deadline this year. And he also has 2 club options the next 2 years at a reasonable figure. It's $10.5 million next year, $11.5 million the year after that. It's a $1 million buyout. If you decline it in 2025, it's a $500,000 buyout in 2026 if you decline that one.
Yep.
If you're the Mariners, if you're paying this kind of package, Ty Pete, Jeter Martinez, Skomberg's, whatever, you have to assume that you're picking up that club option in 2025. Yep. Yeah, you cannot view him as a rental if you're paying that. So that's kind of the idea. He crushes righties. He's more than fine against lefties. He gets on base. He doesn't strike out a ton. Lau's a good player, and he's having a really good year so far in 49 games.
Sure. Walks a lot in general, 10+% walk rates every year.
Yep.
Usually, closer to 11. Strikeout rate, this year it's 24.9% for the Mariners. That's good. For baseball, that's below average. 27% last year. So there is some swing and miss here. He's good enough against lefties, but there is that natural fit there with Dylan Moore just taking his at bats. So yeah, I think Lowe is a guy that we've talked about a lot. Yes, this is Lowe that we've talked about a lot over the last few years. I think he's been, a favorite of mine, maybe ours. I can't quite remember. But we talk about him seemingly every offseason, and he just makes a lot of sense for this ballpark and for this club. Not a great defender, but come on. Like, look what you're running out there now. It's at worst, it's a wash defensively between him and Polanco. So Pete seems really aggressive. We like Ty Pete a lot. But again, the potential to get this guy.
The Rays do too.
Yeah. The potential to get this guy for 3 years at really reasonable money. Like, it's not a lot of money. The Rays aren't like, it's not like the Rays can't afford to pay him this because he's not worth it. It's just, it's the way the Rays operate. So yeah, I think if the Mariners make a major upgrade at second base, it's going to be Lowe. It's not going to be Horner. It's not going to be Chisholm or anything like that. So I think it's going to be Lowe would be where they would make their major upgrade. So yeah, I'm a fan of Lowe. I still think the fit's really solid. So yeah, I'd be pretty happy. Obviously, there's injury questions, just like there are with Jazz, just like there are with Robert, but it's one of the reasons he's going to be available. So sometimes you have to take the risk, and I know
beggars can't be choosers,
right? And I know Pete would suck. I really like Ty Pete a lot. I'd absolutely do this deal for Brandon Lowe if I could get it. If I could get it for this price, this is what it's going to cost at least. So yeah, I'm definitely interested in this.
So like I said, we have. Both Colby and I both have our eyes set on a couple of the same guys. So let's get into one of them. That's Michael Conforto, outfielder for the San Francisco Giants, obviously Pacific Northwest native, grew up a Mariners fan. So your deal here, Colby, is Conforto and right-handed reliever Tyler Rogers from the Giants for Dom Canzone, Ben Williamson, and Michael Morales. So walk us through this one.
Yeah, Conforto's a rental who's having a pretty good year. Not a great year. Pretty good, though. Doesn't really help you much defensively. Not a high on-base guy, at least this year. He's got left-handed pull power. He hits for a decent average. He puts the ball in play a fair amount. And he is, at the very least, he's much better than Mitch Haniger out there in a corner. He's better than, Dom Canzone in a large sample in a corner. So Conforto's a pretty easy upgrade to me. He hits somewhere in the middle of your lineup against right-handed pitching. Rogers is kind of the sneaky prize of this deal, though. You get him for a year and a half. He is a submariner. So it is a different look out of this bullpen that the Mariners currently do not have. He's very good. He doesn't get a ton of strikeouts. It's not really his thing. Ton of ground balls, lots of soft contact. That's his thing. And again, it is a unique arm angle coming out of the pen that the Mariners do not have. This is the guy who is better than Ryan Stanek, not as good as Andres Munoz that we've talked about. The Mariners needing to acquire. So to get kind of one of your secondary bat, which I think Conforto qualifies as a second bat. I think that's a fine second bat to go get, who helps you in the outfield. And then you also, on top of it, get this reliever who's, I wouldn't quite say he's high leverage, but he's really good. And he does things differently, and it's a different look than anything you have in your bullpen, than anything most teams have in their bullpen. How many submariners, like true submariners, are there in the game right now? This guy's one of them. So I like that brings that kind of look to this thing. In terms of cost, it's really hard to say. We just saw a year and 2 months of Hunter Harvey go for a ton. Rogers is at least as good as Harvey, if not better. But you're also throwing on Conforto's contract onto that, which the Giants don't need you to eat, but it's not like it's a bad thing if they save a little bit of money as they kind of retool for next year. So yeah, the price is a little bit up in the air. Like if they said, hey, we'll do this, but we want Ty Pete, like instead of like Williamson or something like that, I'd do that. Like I'd be okay with that because you're getting Rogers for all of next year as well. At what will probably be about $5 million. So really good value there as well. So I'm definitely open in this trade to, maybe altering the prize a little bit, but I do think a guy like Canzone is going to be of some interest to a team like San Francisco. They get a young major leaguer. They could play right away for the rest of the year, see what they have there. Essentially just replaces Conforto, and you get 6 years of that guy versus 2 months of Conforto. And then Williamson is he's a good prospect. Like, is he a great prospect? Is he a sexy prospect? No, but he's a pretty good prospect, pretty good get there as well. And so, and obviously Michael Morales is an interesting rising prospect who could be pitching in the big leagues in, 12 months, which is, something that's going to be interesting. So, I think this deal, if anything, is a little light maybe, and I would be willing to add something to it. But like, I think the most I'm willing to go for this package would be like Pete, Canzone, maybe a Jeter Martinez type, something like that. So flexible, but this is just to give you an idea of like, hey, I wanted to try and get a Canzone trade in here because I do think that guy's going to carry some value to a very specific type of team. And I think San Francisco is that team. So I do think that Canzone for Conforto, like straight up even, would be a really interesting trade for both teams. But obviously Jerry doesn't like to give up that much club control. So I thought by getting Rogers in the deal as well, kind of kill two birds with one stone.
So my Conforto idea was just Conforto straight up. And the Giants get Ben Williamson and Ricardo Cova, who's a 20-year-old infielder, outfielder, who's had some success down in the complex league in the DSL. He hasn't played affiliated ball yet, stateside, but I also have them taking on the contracts of Jorge Polanco and Luis Arias just to kind of offset some of the money. So Conforto, I did the math on this. Conforto is still owed $7.3 million for the rest of the year. Polanco is owed 4.2. If you include his buyout, it's 4.9. Then there's $2 million left on Arias's deal as well. So I don't have the Giants chipping in any money to make up the difference, but it makes up most of it. It's about $1.1 million off in terms of just 2024 payroll is concerned. But Conforto is a really nice fit. Obviously, the Pacific Northwest connection, so that's a nice little story. But he's slashing 237, 310, 438, 112 WRC plus this year. He's actually held his own against lefties this year as well, so he's not unplayable in that regard. Historically, though, he's been a 93 WRC plus against lefties, so you probably don't want him facing lefties as much, but he's fine. Like, you can use him. Like, 93 WRC plus isn't a disaster.
You have Robles and Moore. You don't have to sit him against every lefty, but you have options there if you want to.
Yeah. All right, so we have a big target that both of us share. We'll go over that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. PrizePicks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. And a general rule of thumb here, if they breathe air and they're scheduled to pitch against the Mariners, it's probably a good idea to pick more on their strikeouts. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, Mariners will kick off the second half of the season on Friday against the Astros. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. So now it's time for both Colby and I to essentially swing for the fences. We both have the same target in mind. Actually, a couple of targets, you'll see in a second here, in mind, with the Chicago White Sox, of course. So Colby's deal here is Mariners get Luis Robert Jr. and Michael Kopech from the White Sox for Harry Ford, Lazaro Montes, Tyler Locklear, and Michael Arroyo.
For 3.5 years of a high impact potential MVP level player, it's going to cost you a lot. And to get that guy without trading one of your young starting pitchers, without trading your best prospect, it's going to cost more on the back end too. Could you maybe, if you include Colt Emerson, could you maybe keep like a Tyler Locklear? Maybe. Is it worth it? No, not to me. It's not. So, I don't want to give up Emerson. So you take him out off the board. You have to get creative on the backside. You have to get aggressive on the backside. This is a guy, there's going to be a lot of teams vying for Robert. Chicago is one of the only true sellers on the market right now. So yeah, I gave up 4 of the top 10 prospects, 4 guys who, 2 of them are certainly top 100 prospect types. The other 2, I know that Locklear is on some team or is on some top 100 list, and Arroyo probably should be, or he's getting really close to it. So, is it aggressive? Yes, that's the point. You have to get aggressive to get a guy like this, because forget in general, like how often do you have the opportunity to add a player like Robert to the Seattle Mariners? A guy who's still entering his prime, a guy who's club controlled, who's cheap, who's produced at the major league level. How often do you get a shot to add that guy to your roster? You really don't, because you know what? You don't become a free agent at 26, 27. And even if you did, are those guys going to pick Seattle? Or are they going to choose to sign with the Seattle Mariners? History says no. Mm-hmm. So you don't have a lot of opportunities to go get this guy. And yes, there's huge risk with the injury. I get it. I understand it. I'm troubled by it too. But you don't have a lot of opportunities to go get a player of this magnitude. And sometimes you have to take the shot. And when you look at when you look at how they drafted this time around, if you look at how they've developed the last few years, I'm confident that the Mariners farm system is going to be fine and it will rebound back to these great heights. And this is what you have a farm system for. It is not to, brag that, oh, we have a top 5 farm system. Who cares? Who cares? You want to win at the major league level. That's what you have a farm system for. And if you can't, or it doesn't make sense to wait until all these guys get up and just cross your fingers and hope they're as good as you think they can be, you trade them for players who can help you now. And Luis Robert is the type of guy who can swing, the pendulum of power in the American League, not just the AL West, in the entire American League. League. If Robert is that guy for the next 2 months, the Mariners are going to be considered by a lot of folks favorites to go to the World Series, because if he's that guy, you're as good as Baltimore, you're as good as New York, you're better than Cleveland. Is there a risk that he's not that guy? Of course, it's only 2 months. You never know what you're going to get with these guys. But to me, it's a bigger risk not to go make a move like this and just sit on your hands and hope that these guys all get to the big leagues in a couple of years and hope that the guys on your current roster figure it out. It's a bigger risk to do that. So I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to go get that guy. That's the best guy on the market. I got to pay more than anybody else is willing to pay. Fine. So be it. I'm doing it.
And look, if you're hesitant to do this deal because of the state of the team, the state of this offense, Luis Robert can't fix it alone. All fair points, but look, Luis Robert under club control for 3 more years after this year. This might be your only opportunity to acquire him, like Colby said. So if that's true, right? If he's going to move at some point over the next 2 weeks, you got to do it now. Right? It doesn't matter what the context of your season is. If you really like Luis Robert, if you really want Luis Robert to be a Mariner, you got to do it now. So it doesn't matter what else is happening around you. It doesn't matter what the build of this current team is, because again, I get Luis Robert for another run at it for the next 3 years after this as well. So my idea here for Robert, it's also Robert and Kopech. Look, with Kopech real quick, yeah, he's running an ERA north of 5. Yeah, he's got a high walk rate. Yeah, he's got a negative F4, but he gives the Mariners something that they just don't have a ton of right now in their bullpen. That's swing and miss, consistent swing and miss. I want that guy in this bullpen. I want that fireman that it's do or die. I need a strikeout. Yeah, things could go sideways, but the upside of being able to get a strikeout in that moment is what's most important. Now, we've talked about this a little bit on the show. If the White Sox just want the best prospect package overall, I don't think there's a team that can outbid the Mariners except for the Baltimore Orioles. But if they want a pitching headliner, that's where we run into a little bit of a problem here. So how do you circumvent that? Unless, hey, maybe they think Logan Evans is that guy. But this is assuming they don't think Logan Evans is that guy. And that if you're able to provide a headliner pitcher from your own organization, it's Miller Wu, and obviously you don't want to do that. How do you circumvent that? So I scoured every single team across the league. I factored in how much pitching talent they have in their farm system. Would they be willing to swap a pitching prospect for a position player? Does it even make sense for them to do this with where they are? Would they be interested in Robert themselves? And would they actually be willing to help you land Luis Robert? All those things. And I finally landed on the Pittsburgh Pirates. I think they're a really good fit for this. So I have the Mariners essentially trading 1-for-1 Lazaro Montes for Bubba Chandler. The Pirates have a ton of pitching talent in their farm system that is relatively close. And they obviously have guys like Paul Skeens and Luis Ortiz, Jared Jones at the major league level, Mitch Keller at the major league level as is. So they trade Chandler for Montes. And I thought about Cole Young. Cole Young doesn't make a ton of sense because he's close and they already have O'Neal Cruz and they're going to have Tamar Johnson come up within the next year or so. So that didn't really make a ton of sense. Harry Ford makes quite a bit of sense for them because Henry Davis hasn't panned out and Eddie Rodriguez is hurt, but I felt like Montes made the most sense for the Pirates in the end. But I'm also trading Harry Ford. He's going to the White Sox. Aiden Smith is going to the White Sox. Emerson Hancock is going to the White Sox to give them a guy that could start for them right now, can give them at the very least innings. And Tyler Guff as well, give them a guy to take a shot on and work with and see what's there essentially. And Guff's having a pretty solid year this year as well, down in the minors. So that's the big swing right there. Again, there are a lot of different ways that you can attack a Luis Robert trade, but again, if pitching is important to the White Sox, that's how I would go about it.
Yeah. Essentially giving up the same co-headliners, really, from a Mariners perspective. They're giving up Laz and Ford to kind of grease the wheels. And instead of just giving Laz straight to the White Sox, you're just redistributing a little bit. I do wonder if the back end of that package is going to be enough. But I suppose if the White Sox really want a pitcher in the deal, then it might be enough. And obviously Hancock's the guy they could just slide into their rotation right now and kind of see what they have. So I think in that deal, the White Sox would have to be prioritizing pitching to get that done, because in my deal, it's just 4 bats and they're really good prospect bats. And one of them's big league ready, one of them has big league seasoning, I should say. And the others are pretty close to the big leagues. Ford's pretty close relatively. And Arroyo, the way he's hitting right now, he might move pretty quick. So if they really prioritize the pitching part of it, then you might be able to get them with one high-end pitcher and then some pitching bulk. And then obviously Aiden Smith is the wild card there. And I really don't want to trade Aiden Smith, but for Luis Robert, I mean, I kind of can't say no. So, it's an interesting approach, and it's just kind of funny that we ended up on the same player, essentially giving up the same co-headliners of the deal. Just one of your co-headliners is going to a third team. So, it's going to be expensive. Like it's going to be expensive, but it's worth it.
So my plan was very expensive, right? I gave up Ty Pete. I gave up Jeter Martinez. I gave up Ben Williamson. I gave up Harry Ford and Laz Montes and Aiden Smith. But guess what? My farm system still has Cole Emerson. It still has Cole Young. It still has Felton Celestin, Durangelo Senja, Johnny Farmello, Michael Arroyo, Tyler Locklear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a pretty damn good farm system still. And that's what we've been saying, right? Get aggressive with your guys, because even if you do get aggressive, right? I think the Brandon Lowe trade is very aggressive, right? Even if you get very aggressive, your farm system's still in a really good spot because of how well you've drafted and developed these guys.
I mean, you look at the deals I've traded 4 or 5 of the top 10, and it's still a good farm system because now I'm adding Senja, now I'm adding Sloan, and now I'm adding all these other pieces, and that's not counting the players that are getting better who are staying in the system as we speak. So get aggressive with it. The Mariners can turn a mediocre to bad farm system into one of the best in baseball in a 2-year span. They can do that. How do I know? They've done it twice.
Yeah.
Twice in the last 5 or 6 years they've done it.
Yeah.
Trust that you can do it again and again and again and leverage the farm to try and win something of relevance at the major league level. That is the point. That is why we're here.
And by the way, if money is a concern for you, I didn't even add $10 million. Just a little under that, 9.65 when you factor in Polanco and Arias and the Conforto deal. So that should, in theory, appease Mr. Stanton, right?
It should. And Ty Stanton over here nixed one of my trades because he didn't think it was realistic for Mr. Stanton. But because it wasn't the trade itself. It was that Colby was then going to DFA Mitch Haniger afterward. Which we should do anyways.
I mean, they should. We've talked about this, but will they? No. I'll believe it when I see it. I
don't know. Maybe.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Maybe.
All right. So let's quickly. Well, here, let me go over just a couple of house cleaning things here. So to make room on the 40-man roster, I'm bringing in 4 major leaguers. I'm sending out two guys that are on the 40-man roster, and Polanco and Hancock. So Mike Bauman's getting DFA'd. Duke Ellis is getting DFA'd. I'm sending Ryan Bliss down to AAA, and then when Canzone's back from the IL, he's going to AAA. And that gives me some depth because injuries are still going to probably crop up over the final 2 months of the season.
Sure. I'm adding 4 big leaguers. I'm subtracting 3 from my 40-man, so I'm just going to DFA Baum, and I don't have room for him in my new bullpen anyways, and he's out of options. So that's how I make that work on the 40.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into our lineups real quick here. So for me, against righties, I got Brandon Lowe leading off. Julio hitting second, Luis Robert hitting third, Cal Raleigh hitting fourth. They might do Raleigh third and Robert fourth just to break up the lefty righty thing. Luke Raley fifth, and playing first base. I'll get into that in a second here. Michael Conforto playing left field, hitting sixth, Josh Rojas seventh, Mitch Garver eighth, JP Crawford ninth, with a bit of Mitch Haniger, France, and Victor Robles and Dylan Moore. And then against left-handed pitchers, still going with JP leadoff because JP's actually been really good against lefties. It's a 144 WRC plus against lefties this year compared to a 73 against righties. Then I got Julio hitting second, Robert hitting third, Garver hitting fourth because he's still been really good against lefties this year, despite his overall struggles. Cal fifth because while the batting average isn't there against lefties, still hitting for a lot of power. It's like a 113 WRC plus against lefties this year. Brandon Lowe sixth because he's still pretty good, still serviceable, more than serviceable against lefties. Ty France seventh. So France does make the roster, and he's essentially I hate this. I don't like first base platoons, quote unquote, but I'm essentially running a first base platoon between him and Luke Raley here. France has still been really good against lefties this year. He's hitting for a 128 WRC plus against lefties so far. So that's at least useful. Then I got Victor Robles hitting 8th, playing left field, Dylan Moore hitting 9th, playing third base with Haniger, Raley, Conforto, and Rojas on the bench. So let's get into to Colby's lineup against righties. Do you want to go through this, Colby?
It's JP Crawford leading off, Julio hitting second, Conforto hitting third, Luis Robert hitting 4, Raleigh 5, Raley 6, France 7, Rojas 8, Polanco 9. That's a bench of Haniger, Robles, Garver, Ibanez, because Ty wouldn't be reasonable. I have to have Haniger on my team for some reason. Against lefties, it looks pretty similar. It's Crawford, Julio, Robert, Garver DHing. Andy Ibanez is going to hit 5th against lefties for me. Then it's Cal, France, Victor Robles playing left field, and Dylan Moore hitting 9th playing third base. So that would be the bench of Haniger, Raley, Rojas, and Polanco.
And then our bullpens, or well, our pitching staffs in general, Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. And then the 5th spot is Brian Wu, Logan Evans, and Jonathan Diaz. Bullpen, I couldn't decide. So Austin Voth or Colin Snyder, Voth has been shaky, and then Snyder's been really good. Trent Thornton, Taylor Saucedo, Gabe Spire, who's supposed to be back sometime after the All-Star break, Michael Kopech, Ryan Stanek, Gregory Santos, and Andres Munoz. And Colby's pitching staff, Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. And then the 5th spot is Brian Wu, Logan Evans, Emerson Hancock, Jonathan Diaz. Bullpen is Austin Voth, Trent Thornton, Michael Kopech, Gabe Spire, Ryan Stanek, Tyler Rogers, Gregory Santos, and Andres Munoz. And that about does it for our trade deadline plan. So let us know down in the comments what you think, which of us had the better deadline. And you know what, since we give you guys grades all the time on your trades, give us grades between 20 and 80 on ours.
I would like to say this before we go.
Oh boy.
Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
Fair point indeed. All right. So that is going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patton, I'm Ty Dan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at @LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dan Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day. We'll see you next time. Peace.